Then push. Push. Use those adductors. Use those adductors. I can see it. I can see it. There it is. There's your baby.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Perfect.
After giving birth, it's Adductor Week, Anatomy Tuesday. Mark's going to dive in.
All right, let's dive in. So 4 muscles we're looking at for the adductors. We got the adductor magnus, adductor brevis, adductor longus, and the gracilis. Essentially, all 4 of these muscles are going to originate on the pubis of the pelvis. So up here in the groin, they're going to come down different lengths of the linea aspera, so this medial part of the femur. Function's going to be kind of in isolation. They're going to adduct the leg, so bring that leg to midline. They're also going to assist with hip flexion and extension, so going to be a pretty dynamic muscle group as well. Also going to be really important for leveling the pelvis when we're looking at our gait. So while we're walking, running, cutting, change direction, adductors are going to be really important for absorbing that force, keeping that pelvis level, keeping us injury free. And they're also going to be really important for stabilizing our low back. So they're pretty interconnected with our hip flexors, and an imbalance there can affect our low back. So dynamic muscle group, we're going to dive in.
Good, so far this week you've got to see me give birth, and Mark talked about what the adductors actually do, but now we're going to cover injuries and sports performance.
Yep. So a couple injuries we want to talk about today. First one being groin strains, groin tears. So when we talk about the groin, kind of a loose term for the adductors and the hip flexors, both of those working together, see a really common injury, especially with change of direction sports. So when we're talking about basketball players, soccer players, football players, especially defensive backs who are backpedaling, changing direction very reactively, putting a lot of force in those adductors, and tennis players are another really common one. So that's a very common injury. We want to make sure that we're strong and that we're loose in this area. Another one going to be issues with the stream theory. So when we're looking at the adductor group, above and below, kind of looking at the knee. So if our adductors are weak and we have a muscular imbalance there, we have first off, a problem with some movement patterns. So we're not moving correctly when it comes to kind of that eccentric loading. When we're trying to change direction, we're trying to plan, absorb force. We have an issue there, so those things can leak down into our knee. And if our adductors are weak and imbalanced, we have to use our quadriceps and our hamstrings a little bit more to absorb and take on some of that force. So issues at the knee for sure, and then the hip flexors can be another issue. So if our adductors aren't working properly, our hip flexors are going to take over and try to take on a lot of that work. That's going to cause us to have really tight hip flexors, overused hip flexors, bringing us into that anterior pelvic tilt, can produce that low back pain. A lot of those things that we've covered in previous videos, but adductors super important, and keeping things healthy above and below the chain. So.
All right, so now we got the in-depth look of the programming and kind of a long-term view of everything, but what are some take-home exercises we can do today to really keep those adductors healthy and strong? Like we talked about that unilateral work and the stability of that pelvis, so anything that we're doing lunging-wise here, or even raising that leg up and doing a Bulgarian split squat, something like that, that's really going to activate that adductor and its ability to stabilize that pelvis. If our knee is moving all over the place, that's something where we can really look into and strengthen that adductor to keep that knee stable. Another exercise that I perform with a lot of athletes, and this is, again, a unilateral movement, but a lateral lunge or a Cossack squat, just coming in here and really activating the adductors in here. There's a big range of motion, and a lot of athletes will really struggle with that lateral lunge rather than just straight sagittal planar lunge. Mark's going to demonstrate here Copenhagen hold, and this is kind of the gold standard right now for adductor health as an exercise that you can do in the weight room. And we're just putting a foot up here, and we're squeezing these glutes all the way through and feeling this all the way in here. Something that we can do to help, a little tip, is if Mark bumps all the way out and just has his big toe on this bench, it's going to take a little bit of pressure off that knee, and we can come up all the way up here. The last one Mark's going to demonstrate is a glute bridge squeezing in. So this is a little different than a lot of the bridging stuff that we do for the glutes, but we're actually squeezing this ball and activating those adductors as we're squeezing up. And this is very similar to a sprinting motion that we do when we sprint, activating those adductors as a hamstring.
Okay, good. So now what are some things we can do from an injury prevention standpoint to strengthen these adductors and keep us in the field longer? A couple things I want to touch on, but as a general rule of thumb, what we want to do for these muscle groups is we want to loosen them up with stretching and dynamic warm-up, and we want to strengthen them as much as possible. So for the adductors, a couple things I want to touch on for dynamic warm-up, for getting these things loose before competition. We don't really consciously stretch and warm these up like we do a lot of other muscle groups. So a couple exercises I want to show you. First, I'm going to bring you over. We're going to do just some leg swings. Great dynamic warm-up, getting kind of a squared stance, and we're just bringing the leg through. we're getting a stretch, we're getting a contraction through each one of these motions. Great one before competition, and then a way to activate these things. Take a couple minutes in the locker room before games. We're going to kind of thread the needle with our leg here. Get straight. We're going to contract these adductors and just work on some single leg raises. Feeling this contraction, holding it for a little bit. Getting these things fired up and active. Really basic, easy to do beforehand. And then another key to injury prevention is just having these things strong, like we talked about. Making sure your chain is working properly. So using those take-home exercises that we just went over and following up with some stretching that we're going to cover now.
Good, so we know what happens if these adductors are super tight and we're compensating movement pattern-wise, especially going with that stream theory where knees and lower back are hurting because of it. So what are some exercises we can do right after watching this video to really help open it up and make it free them up a little bit? So Mark's going to enter the pain cave a little bit here, and this is a barbell smash. We're putting this barbell on our adductors inside of that thigh right here. All we're doing, just 2 minutes, 2 or 5 minutes, just rolling it out, entering that pain cave. It's a nice, fun little exercise. You'll be smiling after it, but really frees it up a little bit. With this one, especially if you have a lot of knee tightness or pain here, this one will really free that up for you. Feeling really good. Next exercise we can look into is a frog stretch with little hip rockers here. So we can come down here, frog stretch here, really sit into this groin area. And something that we can miss out on here is picking up this foot and really sitting back into this. So as we gain a little bit more range of motion in this, as we sit in this frog stretch, you can pick up the foot and twist into this groin area. The last one that you can do pretty much anywhere is just a little hip rocker. I think I took this one from Chris Duffin, but you're just right here as a warm-up, and we're stretching this inside adductor here, shifting back and forth, just opening up just like this. You get 20 pulses just like this, opening up the inside of that groin adductor region. Thank you guys for watching. Now that you guys know the adductors are good for more than just giving birth to the supple leopard, a beautiful, beautiful book. Mark's going to take it from here.
They are more good for more important.
Good for more. Thank you guys for watching. Subscribe.